Hello, indies and introspectives. My name is TB's Guy, and let's finally talk about the two games that Riot have announced under the Riot Forge label. As we discussed last time, the Riot Forge label is a publishing label under which Riot will be partnering with third-party studios to create primarily single-player games set in the League of Legends universe that they themselves, because they're busy maintaining 4 billion different live service games, aren't in a position to make. Ostensibly, Riot are going to be staying out of the actual development process of the game and just offering access to the League of Legends IP, narrative resources, QA, localization, and other structural benefits like that, but not necessarily influencing the production of the games themselves. As we discussed in the last video, I have my doubts about how true that's going to turn out to be, but it's certainly a nice sentiment to proceed with. So, one of the games, and the one with the most substantive trailer, certainly, is Convergence, a League of Legends story, starring Echo. Now, we're going to have to go mostly off press releases and whatever details I could gather from the discussion around the games rather than the trailers, because the trailers themselves really don't contain very much beyond like some key visuals and some vague narrative teasing about what might, maybe, kind of could be going on in the games. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in this video is it's pure speculation, but it's speculation that comes from, experience. So, we know Convergence is a 2D action platformer, which makes sense because Double Stallion, the studio that's producing it, have a lot of experience with brawlers and 2D action platformers. It's going to be centered around Echo and around his powers of time. Specifically, the blurb on the website for Double Stallion says that it will be exploring the consequences and the price that you have to pay for manipulating time in the way that Echo does. And one of the things that happens in the trailer is that two voices are delivering the voiceover for the trailer. First, there's Echo's own voice, young boyish, which tells a story from what seems to be his contemporary perspective, and then sometimes it switches over to a much older adult male voice, which is delivering the same script, but clearly from a different point in life. The implication seems to be that we're talking to either two different characters who are saying the same thing, or one character at two different points in their life. I would say the first one, because the adult voice just doesn't sound anything like Echo. Even like if you imagined Echo as an adult, it doesn't really sound a lot like that. But I have to imagine that the central mechanic around which the entire game will be based, because indeed that's the central narrative conceit of Echo, is his SED drive, his ability to reverse and play back time and change things. Something that's already been explored in the lore that we have for Echo is the consequences that he has to face when he has the SED drive. It's a very useful tool. It allows him to save a lot of his friends from trouble and stuff like that, get himself out of sticky situations, but it also always comes with limitations and a price. For example, in a comic that was published when Echo was first released, we saw how, even though he had the ability to reverse time, he was unable to save one of his friends from a rather grisly murder. We also saw in the animated short that accompanied Echo's release that even though he can use the SED drive to reverse time and play out a perfect fight where he wins every exchange, all the hits he takes as he's learning to win the fight, they stay with him and he still takes that damage, so there's always a price to pay for using his time powers. As near as if I had to speculate on what the story of this game is going to be, it's going to be something about, like, we have this scene here in the trailer with the tower exploding. It's going to be something about Echo uses his time powers to reverse some kind of disaster, or some bad thing happens that he doesn't want to have happen. He uses his time powers to prevent it, but then because he prevented one thing from happening, then there's this butterfly effect of, oh, you prevented this thing from happening, but that just ensured that an even worse thing is going to be happening, and so Echo has to prevent that one. And then that turns out, oh, that triggers an even worse thing. Like, so that the game is going to be this loop of Echo trying to fix time so that a whole bunch of bad things just simply do not happen. And it's going to be exploring the consequences of doing that particular kind of thing. At least that's as far as I can make out from sort of the hints that they're dropping in this trailer and the hints that they're dropping in the press release material surrounding the game. As for how the gameplay is going to play out, well, they say it's an action platformer, and for that, we can actually look to Double Stallion's own website for a little bit of a hint about what that might look like, because they're also the publisher, the creators of, well, a number of mobile games, OKKO Lakewood Plaza Turbo, which is an Android iOS game, and Big Action Mega Fight, also for Android, iOS, and PC. So relatively small-scale games, but also this game called Speed Brawl, which I would surmise is probably the one that's closest to the kind of thing that we're going to be seeing from Echo Convergence. Let me get a proper video quality up here. So this is a previous game that they published for the Switch. And I think this is probably their most polished work, and I think it probably reflects pretty clearly what kind of thing they're going to be doing with Echo Convergence. Like, as you can see, they're already well experienced in doing, like, high-speed brawlers, lots of action, lots of handmade 2D animation, which I personally always deeply appreciate. And you can see that the aesthetic that they're going for in this particular game is already one that would be well-suited to adventures set in Son, albeit, you know, it's already got that sort of quasi-Victorian, steampunky aesthetic thing. Like, that robot is practically Blitzcrank. So this is probably a pretty good barometer for the kind of gameplay we can probably expect in Echo Convergence. Lots of jumping, lots of flying around, using Echo's time powers to rewind back and forth, punching out multiple enemies in midair, and stuff like that. And because every single game that Double Stallion has worked on in the past has been, you know, brawling games. It's this Speed Brawler game, which is an action platformer, OKKO, which is a brawler, Big Action Mega Fight, which is a brawler, I have to imagine that Convergence is going to be relatively light on story. Like, I have to imagine that Convergence is going to be a game that's mostly about the action, mostly about the fighting and the combat and the running around in the environments, and less about long-ass winding cutscenes about Echo's personal feelings and what's going on in Son on a political level. I don't have a problem with that, by the way. That sounds perfectly fine to me, just to set your expectations for what you can probably be looking for. As for other champions that might show up, because this game seems to be rather small scale, like, this seems to be very personal. It's Echo, it's Son, it's his time powers, it's doing stuff like that. I wouldn't expect to see that many other champions showing up. Like, I can imagine Urgot showing up as, like, a boss, for example. I can imagine Sack or Twitch showing up for something, but I probably wouldn't expect to see a lot of, like, Piltover champions make an appearance. I wouldn't expect to see Jinx, for example, because she's probably off doing havoc in Piltover rather than messing around in Son. I wouldn't expect to see champions from any other regions. Like, I wouldn't expect to see a Demacian champion show up. I wouldn't expect to see any of the Shuriman champions show up. It's probably just going to be Echo, Son, maybe a few other League of Legends champions as bosses or support characters, and that's pretty much going to be it. What I'm curious about, though, is whether or not we're going to get to see Echo's parents, who are actually kind of an important part of his story. If you remember, good long time ago, I don't think I ever made a video about this, but when Echo came out, he got a short story called Lullaby, which discusses in detail his honestly rather heartbreaking relationship with his parents and the ways in which, like, him discovering the set drive and having these time powers challenges his relationship with his family, because his family and his mom and dad have just sacrificed everything, their health, their well-being. They've worked their asses off to get enough money together to send him to Piltover so he could be a famous inventor scientist up there, or at least make money enough to have better life away from the swamps of Son. And Echo, because he has the set drive and because he has a lot of attachment to Son and his friends, and he's worried about his parents, has decided not to go. Right? And there's a whole story just about him having that difficult emotional relationship with his parents, where he loves them and deeply appreciates them and cares about all the sacrifices they've made for him. And one of the points of that story is that there's some things his set drive can't fix. Like, it's like, he can use the time reversal thing to do everything perfectly so that nothing goes wrong, but there's these emotional parts of his life that cannot be fixed by his superpowers, which is a very Spider-Man kind of thing, really. And I don't think necessarily that's going to be much of what's in Convergence. Like, I don't think it's going to be spending a lot of time being introspective about Echo. I think it's going to be more, oh no, a thing is exploding. You need to use your time powers to prevent the exploding thing from something. Oh no, this guy's going to die. You need to use your time powers to reach him in time. Like, I think it's going to be more along those lines, at least based on the other work of the studio and based on, like, just the pitch that's being made here. Like, the pitch that's being made here is very much more about, oh, hey, look at the cool robots. Hey, look at the cool explosions. Hey, look at the cool time powers. There's not so much character introspection going on here. As for the visual style, by the way, love the look of this. Like, this is a very quickly put together trailer. Like, some of the animations on the characters is a little jank, honestly. Looking at Speed Brawlers and the other games that this studio has published, I think they can do a lot better than the animation that's specifically on display here, which gives me the sense that the trailer is maybe a little bit hastily put together. But I love the aesthetic that's going on here. I love the comic book hard shading thing that they've got going. Like, notice how shadows are all black. Like, there's no gradient shadow as such. It's all black shadows and then bright primary colors for the light surfaces, and that gives this wonderful sort of neon-looking aesthetic to it that I think worked really well, which I think is going to be really cool for a place like Son, especially, to be working with. Also, look at the little dots that highlight things here in the lighting. Now, those dots are they called moire dots? I can't remember, but they're certainly called screen tones when we use them in modern comic books, because they're a technique that's invented for representing color in comic books, but while still saving on ink. Rather than coloring the whole thing flat, you color only with a few dots, and then you get a nice colored surface while saving on ink and also not saturating the page. It's a thing from old comic book publishing. Anyway, it's become relatively popular in recent times as a visual aesthetic to indicate a kind of comic book graphic-like style in modern visuals and animation. We saw it most prominently, for example, in Into the Spider-Verse, which used this kind of effect very liberally. And I like that we get this extremely stylized graphical look for Son and these little comic booky effects. And also, just look at the effects when Echo uses his set drive. Like, these are absolutely gorgeous. Let me see if I can... oh, hang on. Skipped too far. Like, look at this. Like, I feel like a lot of this trailer was probably put together a little bit hastily, but they definitely put some effort in where it counts. Like, the set drive, all the, like, the winding around of time and all the symbols that are floating around and all that stuff, that's immaculately put together. I really, really love the look of this. But it's also highly stylized. You can also see that in the explosion. Like, the way the explosion is rendered is also, like, super comic booky, super cartoony. And you can see here's a lovely effect. That's a chromatic aberration, I believe. Is that what it's called? I always get the name of this particular effect wrong, but basically, you can see they are separating the red, the green, and the yellow out, and blurring them from side to side. Again, an effect that was used in Into the Spider-Verse very successfully, but which also, again, lends it this kind of lo-fi VHS, kind of slightly raw aesthetic that I really dig. Like, I really am looking forward to seeing how they blow this kind of visual art style out into a full video game, and I'm excited to start running through environments that look like this. Anyway, moving on to Ruined King. Now, this one features voiceover from Thresh because it's a Shadow Isles and Bilgewater story. Specifically, Thresh in this voiceover is talking to his king, i.e. the Ruined King, and promising him, we're gonna do a harrowing all over the world. And if you remember, the harrowing in League of Legends lore is an event that happens where the black mist from the Shadow Isles expands out over the ocean, and like hordes of undead spirits and monsters follow in its wake, trying to consume all life that they come across as they move across the world. Specifically in this one, Thresh is talking to the Ruined King, who is a character we only recently learned is still... I won't say alive, because he's undead, but like who still exists in the world. The Ruined King is a mad king who tried to use the healing waters of the Blessed Isles to revive his wife, but in trying to do so, he triggered what's called the Ruination, just a massive magical cataclysm that fucked up the Shadow Isles forever and caused all stuff to be undead and just absolutely garbage hellish there for all time. For a long time, he was sort of a character who was the person who caused the Ruination, but he wasn't really an active player in League of Legends lore. But with the release of Senna, we got a lore update to her saying that she has figured out that the Ruined King still exists and that he's controlling, to some extent, the Black Mist and the Shadow Isles, and he's searching for some kind of a secret that's gonna do a thing. Senna, for her part, has made it her mission to chase down the Ruined King, fight him, and release the cursed souls that are trapped in the Black Mist, while, of course, the Ruined King has some unspecified plan to do a bad thing and make stuff go wrong. I don't know, vaguely. So, in the voiceover for this thing, Thresh is promising the Ruined King that they're gonna do a harrowing that engulfs the entire world. They will all know fear. They will all know your name. So this is sort of where the Echo story, Convergence, seemed to be a much more personal, small-scale narrative. Like, it's just Echo, and it's just Son, and they're just, like, he's just running around doing time stuff there. This is something with much more global implications. Like, this seems to be setting up the idea that Thresh and the Ruined King, and presumably Hecarim and the other Shadow Isles champions, are going to be attempting a worldwide harrowing, and the first place that it hits is going to be Bilgewater, which means Bilgewater are going to have to be the first people to fight back. At least that's, as far as I can make out, that's basically what's being set up here. Now, in terms of storyline, according to Riot, this is going to happen in the aftermath of the Burning Tides event. If you remember, Burning Tides was the revolution that Miss Fortune undertook in Bilgewater to unseat Gangplank and install herself as Pirate Lord of the entire Bilgewater faction, on the entire Bilgewater region. Something which has had mixed success for her. Like, she's definitely managed to depose Gangplank, but she doesn't have the full loyalty of all the other pirate lords just yet, and she's engaged in some rather nasty political struggles with them. For his part, Gangplank is still alive, as we know. He's just got a robot arm now, and he's a little bit more of an underground character, gathering up forces and allies for, you know, a counter-rebellion against Miss Fortune, for which he has managed to recruit the cult of Ilaoi and Nagakiboros, or rather the cult of Nagakiboros that Ilaoi is the head priestess of, who are helping him, at least in some respects, to make his little rebellion a reality. So, if I had to take a guess on how this game is going to play out, by the way, the game is going to be a story-driven, turn-based RPG, which is, yes, something I have wanted in the League of Legends universe for a very long time, because the League of Legends universe is so perfectly suited to that kind of gameplay experience, where Riot have stated outright that you're going to be playing as champions, and it's gonna be turn-based, it's gonna be an RPG, it's gonna have RPG elements, and it's gonna be story-driven, all of which sounds very good to me. Now, if I had to take a guess about how the story is going to play out, I would say that it's going to be starting in Bilgewater, where, like, Miss Fortune is fighting against Gangplank's faction, and there's all kinds of political infighting, yada, yada, yada. Then the harrowing shows up, like all the Shadow Isles champions just show up, and there's an attack on Bilgewater that forces the disparate factions of Bilgewater to unite against a common enemy, and then set out to fight the harrowing in some way or another. Maybe beat it back or defeat the Ruined King. Who knows how far they're going to take this, but that seems to be what's being set up here. And I would imagine, because we also know they have confirmed that we're going to be exploring Bilgewater and the Shadow Isles, which means that at some point you do take the fight to the Shadow Isles. Like, you do go there to do a thing somehow or somewhere. So that sort of teases us on where we're going to be heading with it. Now, for gameplay, again, we know nothing except it's an RPG turn-based, but we do know one of the people who is contributing to the art style. Joe Maduero, I think I'm mispronouncing that, is a comic book artist who's responsible for, among other things, the Battle Chasers comic book universe, and who helped design the Battle Chasers Night War video game. A game of which I have a few gameplay videos on the channel, actually. They're pretty old if you want to go find them, but which is just a gorgeous video game. Now, Joe Mad's particular art style is very pulpy, very sort of fantasy, like dark fantasy, sort of pulpy, cartoonish, but also rather anime-inspired, and it's an aesthetic that I think works absolutely perfectly for the two regions that his studio, or the studio that he co-founded, rather, are being given to handle here. Like, it works perfectly with, like, sort of high fantasy pirate stuff, and it works perfectly with high fantasy undead, shambling horrors kind of stuff. It's again, it's a very graphic, very cartoony comic booky style that he got known for, in which he has invested the games that he has worked on with. Speaking of which, he's worked on Darksiders Genesis, which is the newest one in the Darksiders series. I don't know much about that particular game, but I do know Battle Chasers Night War. Now, here is a visual example of the kind of art style that Joe Maduero has. Lots of, like, pulpy, comic book-looking and anime-inspired nonsense, like giant swords, big armors, huge gloves, huge assets, all that stuff. And that's gonna work really well, I think, with the Shadow Isles, and with that particular type of aesthetic. And what I'm really hoping is that they're gonna basically be recycling some of what Battle Chasers Night War is. You can kind of already see how this particular style fits into stuff like Bilgewater and the Shadow Isles. Battle Chasers Night War, by the way, really good video game. You should definitely pick it up and play it, because it's a really fun little RPG. Also turn-based, by the way. So I think this is a pretty good style guide for the kind of thing that we can probably expect to see from like, look at these. Like, look at the models in those combat scenes. They're just so gorgeous. The animation is immaculate in this game too, by the way. So I'm really enthusiastic about the Ruined King, or about Ruined King, a League of Legends story, which is what it's technically actually called. I think it's got a lot of great pedigree behind it, and if they put the same amount of effort into that as they put into Battle Chasers, it's gonna be an absolutely gorgeous game to play. But still, we know little to nothing about how any of this is actually going to be playing out, and I'm speculating entirely based on press releases and my own knowledge and happenstance about the studios and the people involved with them. I think it's a good thing that Riot is doing this. I think it's a really good thing that they finally recognize that they can't manage their full portfolio of champions themselves. It's been a long time since we had a substantial Bilgewater update for a lot of the champions. When was the last time? Was the last time really Tales of... Was it really the audio plays? No, Miss Fortune got a comic, didn't she? I don't know. But like characters like Echo, characters like the people of Bilgewater... a number of the characters in like Shurima have not really had any updates to them in a very long time. So having Riot Forge as a place where like studios can come and pitch various video game concepts for them is a good thing, because it allows Riot to expand on the stories that can actually be told about these goddamn characters. As I said in my previous video, I hope that besides a story-driven first person, I keep saying first person instead of single player, a story-driven single-player RPG and an action platformer, which are kind of safe bets when it comes to video games, I hope we also see weird stuff like dating sims or management simulators or, I don't know, walking sims? Like, make a walking simulator set in some kind of League of Legends universe where you just get to walk around Piltover. That would be pretty cool. I hope they do slightly more niche, off-the-wall stuff like that, besides these, admittedly, rather exciting prospects of more conventional indie games. I think I've exhausted, though, all I had to say about these things. Obviously, I'll be doing more videos about this stuff as it actually comes into development. Like, these are very, very early concept trailers. I wouldn't expect to see anything from these games, even in 2020. Like, I would expect to see them maybe in 2021. Is when they actually start getting release dates and stuff like that, because in 2020 I don't expect we'll see more than like a couple of roadmap updates and maybe some updated trailers for it, because this is like very early in development, no gameplay footage, nothing to indicate a release date. Yeah. Am I out of things to say now? I think I'm out of things to say now, which means it's time for the Patreon crawl and for me to beg you for money, I guess. If you have enjoyed this video, please feel free to hit the like, comment, and subscribe buttons down below. Those buttons make numbers go up, and that's what YouTube actually cares about. So, you know, I need it to live. If you want to support the channel more directly, I have Patreon. I have some tip jars down in the description that you can use as well if you are so inclined. And if you don't want to support my channel specifically directly, that's completely okay, and I understand. But at the end of my videos, regardless of that, I do encourage everyone to support content creators with whatever you can. Like, because especially for smaller content creators, especially for people who are like starting out or who don't have huge audiences, $1 donations can literally be the same as thousands of views on a video. Like, it makes a disproportionately enormous difference to get those small donations, those small Patreon pledges, much more than you think. It matters so much more than you think. So whether it's me or someone else, if there's an online content creator whose work you enjoy, please consider supporting them directly with anything you can, whenever you can, because we need your help to not be slaves to the YouTube algorithm, to be able to do niche things and not have to chase the algorithm all the time. And also, especially in times around Christmas, those are expensive times for everybody, but even more so for content creators who can't take time off without losing a substantial amount of their revenue from the work that they do. So, yeah, just want to encourage that at the end of my videos. If you haven't enjoyed this video, please feel free to hit the like button. Actually, you know what? Fuck it. Hit the like button. If you don't enjoy this video, hit the like button anyway. Don't hit the dislike button. Fucking hit the like button. Give me the numbers. I want them. I was going to make up a whole thing about the dislike button, but you know what? No. If you haven't enjoyed this video, hit the like button anyway. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. YouTube doesn't care if you hit the like or the dislike button. It's all engagement. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm tired, but excited. Thank you very much for watching.